Welcome back. Today on The Explainer, we're diving straight into something truly special. We're embarking on an epic historical and theological journey to unpack a massive mystery sitting right at the very heart of Islamic history. It's an incredible story about unbreakable faith, mind-blowing geopolitical strategy, and a lineage that literally changed the world forever. So let's jump right in.
Now, to really grasp this journey, we've got to start by looking at a massive historical paradox. I mean, think about the ancient world for a second. You had the mighty Roman Empire, right? You had the incredibly wealthy Persian Empire. Yet when it came time to establish the ultimate house of God, the Kaaba, the chosen location wasn't some thriving, lush metropolis. It was the absolute middle of nowhere, a desolate, blistering desert in Mecca. So why on earth choose Mecca?
It's just such a stark contrast. On one side, human logic totally dictates that you'd build your greatest monuments in a place of power and wealth, like Rome or Persia. But Mecca, we're talking about a place where the sun practically rained down fire. There was zero agriculture, no flowing rivers, just piercing empty silence. From a worldly perspective, it makes absolutely no sense. But as you'll see, from a divine perspective, it turns out to be incredibly strategic.
All right, Section 1. 3 categories of Arabs. So historians generally sort ancient Arabs into 3 distinct buckets. First up, you have the Arab Baida. These were the original inhabitants who lived thousands of years before Islam, but they went completely extinct. Think of tribes like Ad and Thamud. Next, we have the Arab Ariba. These are the pure original Arabs from the Yemen region, including famous tribes like the Aus and Khazraj. But the third group, the Arab Mustariba, or the Arabized Arabs, is where our story really takes off. They weren't originally Arab, but they migrated to the area, integrated, and eventually learned the language perfectly.
And here's why that matters. Prophet Muhammad actually belongs to this third group, the Arab Mustariba. His lineage traces straight back to Adnan and all the way down to Fikhr, who earned the title Quraysh, which of course sparked the legendary Quraysh tribe. And what's absolutely fascinating is that this Arabized group eventually outshined the pure Arabs in their mastery of the Arabic language, becoming famous across the entire peninsula for their unparalleled poetry.
Moving on to Section 2. Ibrahim's ultimate trials.
Ibrahim's story begins in the ancient city of Babylon. He was actually born to a father who carved idols for a living. But from a really young age, Ibrahim completely rejected this. I mean, he'd ask, "Why worship stones you just carved yourself?" His father's response was to threaten to stone him. Eventually, King Nimrod decided to make a terrifying public example of Ibrahim by throwing him into a massive raging fire. And here's the crazy part. Right as he was being thrown in, the angel Jibril appears and asks, "Do you need any help?" Ibrahim simply responds, "Does he not see my condition?" His reliance on Allah was so unshakable, he didn't even ask for angelic intervention. And miraculously, Allah commanded that raging fire to become cool and peaceful. But surviving that fire? Yeah, that was literally just the beginning. Abraham, along with his nephew Lut, left their comfortable lives in Babylon and set off on a grueling, multi-generational migration. We're talking traveling from Babylon, up to Haran, over to Palestine, down into Egypt, and eventually this lineage leads all the way down to Mecca. Throughout this incredible journey, years slowly turned into decades. 86. Let that number sink in for a second. Despite decades of continuous prayers, Ibrahim and his first wife, Sarah, remained childless. It wasn't until the advanced age of 86 that Ibrahim was finally blessed with his very first child, a son named Ismail, born to his second wife, Hajar. Imagine waiting 86 years for a kid. You'd think the hardest part was over, right? But his ultimate test was still waiting.
Which brings us to Section 3. Miracles in the desert.
So Allah commands Abraham to take Hajar and his brand new baby boy Ismail into the completely uninhabited valley of Mecca and just leave them there, alone. No food, no water. When Abraham turns around to walk away, Hajar, understandably panicking, asks why he's abandoning them. But when she finally realizes this is actually a divine decree, her response is just breathtaking. She says, if this is Allah's command, He will take care of us. That level of absolute, unquestioning faith while staring down a scorching, deadly desert is just staggering.
Obviously, their provisions run out pretty fast. Hajar frantically starts running back and forth between the hills of Safa and Marwa, looking for anything. And then, a miracle.
A spring of pure water literally bursts forth from the ground right near the infant Ismail's feet. Hajar, trying to contain the gushing water, yells out, "Zamzam, Zamzam," which means, "Stop, stop." Now, the birds circling this miraculous new water source ended up attracting a pure Arab tribe called the Jurhum. They asked Hajar if they could settle there. Because they stayed, young Ismail grew up surrounded by them, learned the pure Arabic language, and boom, that's how the Arab Mustariba lineage officially begins.
You'd think they'd catch a break now, right? Nope, the trials weren't over. Years later, Ibrahim comes back to visit his son, only to receive a prophetic dream commanding him to sacrifice Ismail. It's an absolutely unimaginable test. As they're walking together to fulfill this command, Satan appears, whispering to Ibrahim, trying to get him to disobey. But Ibrahim doesn't just ignore him. He aggressively rejects him by throwing stones at him. That's actually an event millions of Muslims physically reenact today during the Hajj pilgrimage. Finally, right as Ibrahim presses the blade to his son's neck, Allah miraculously replaces Ishmael with a ram. The ultimate test of obedience was passed.
Okay, Section 4, Building the Kaaba.
Following that, Allah commanded the father and son to build his house, the Kaaba, right there next to the waters of Zamzam. As they were building the walls higher and higher, Ibrahim stood on a stone that miraculously softened under his weight, leaving his footprints permanently embedded in it. Today, we know that as Maqamul Ibrahim, and when they needed just one final stone to complete a corner, Ismail was guided to the Hajar Aswad. This was no ordinary rock. Islamic tradition holds it was sent down directly from heaven. It was originally purely white, but turned black over time by the sins of humanity.
Now, while they are physically laying these stones, Ibrahim is also laying the spiritual groundwork for the future with 4 profound du'as, or prayers. First, he prays for sustenance for the believers, though Allah gently corrects him, noting that worldly sustenance is provided for everyone. Second, he prays for leadership for his offspring, and Allah replies that this promise won't apply to the unjust. Third, in a really heartbreaking moment, he prays for his idol-carving father's forgiveness, but this is rejected, because associating partners with Allah is unforgivable. And finally, his 4th prayer, he asks for a prophet to be sent from among his descendants.
And guys, the payoff for that 4th prayer is incredible. It wasn't answered the next day or even in his lifetime. It took over 20 generations of waiting, but it was perfectly answered with the birth of Prophet Muhammad in that exact same city of Mecca. In fact, Prophet Muhammad famously said, "I am the result of the prayer of my father Ibrahim." It perfectly closes the genealogical loop we started with.
Let's wrap this all together in Section 5, the wisdom behind Mecca.
So, back to our original question. Why on earth did Allah choose this barren desert? Well, geopolitically, it created a sort of zero-distraction zone. See, the Roman and Persian empires, they only bothered conquering lands that had agricultural wealth or strategic resources. Mecca, it had absolutely nothing they wanted. Because it was so harsh and resource-poor, these massive, greedy empires completely ignored it. And that allowed Mecca to become this perfectly neutral cradle. It was a place where the seeds of a new global faith could grow freely, totally safe from being crushed by a paranoid superpower. It's strategic genius.
And think about the theological side of this location too. If the Kaaba had been built in the heart of Rome or Persia, what would have happened? Over time, it would have just become known as a Roman temple or some Persian monument claimed by whatever worldly king was in charge. But because it was built in a completely unclaimed, empty desert valley, no human king could ever claim ownership of it. It remained pure, unclaimed by humanity. It remained solely and exclusively Baytullah, the house of Allah.
Which brings us to a really personal takeaway. We live in a world obsessed with instant gratification, right? We want our packages delivered tomorrow, and we expect our prayers to be answered immediately. But prayers aren't guaranteed next-day delivery. Think about Ibrahim. He waited 86 years for a child. He obediently built a house in a completely dead valley. He made a prayer for a prophet that wasn't answered for over 2 millennia. Yet, he never despaired. He understood that true blessings are found in following the divine command with unwavering patience. So, I'll leave you with this. When you feel like your prayers are just echoing into a void, are you truly as patient as Ibrahim? Something to think about. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I will catch you next time.